In this video, we will explore all about app configuration in Azure. My name is Brugain and welcome to .NET Mastery. If you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you are notified when I release a new video. And back to the main topic, app configuration in Azure. App configuration is a service to centrally manage application settings and feature flags. That brings up two main topics. We will explore how to manage application settings first, and then what feature flags are and how can they help to activate or deactivate features in an application without deploying the code. To explore that, make sure you have an account on Azure portal, and we will create a new application in Visual Studio, and let me get started on that. We want to create our project. Let me create a new project in Visual Studio here. I will search for MVC application. Let me create that. Let me give it a name of Azure App Configuration _ sample and create that. We will use .NET 8 here. Authentication type, I will keep that as none. That looks good. Let me create the project. And perfect, our project is created. If I go to appsettings.json, but then right here, let me add two more blocks here. One block is for connection string, and there we will have the connection for Azure App Configuration. Other than that, let's say we have a demo section where we have three values. One is for the background color, a welcome text, and a refresh value. Refresh value, ignore what that is right now, but let me use these two to display something on the home page of our application. Now, in order to get the values here in our controller, let me create a model class for that, and I will call that SomeSettings. Inside there, I want two properties with the name of welcome text and background color. Let me create that here. And perfect, that looks good. With that, we have a class here, but we want to retrieve these properties in the home controller. We can do that by using AppConfiguration. So in the home controller here, let me inject AppConfiguration. Using that, we can retrieve and populate some settings. We want to retrieve the background color. We can do that by using configuration. I like to use getValue here, define the type here, and then we need to retrieve that value. In order to retrieve anything from the app settings, we need the section name, that is demo. Let me add that, and then the value name. Let me copy background color to avoid any spelling mistake. That looks good. Next property will be welcome text here, and let me copy that. Perfect. We do not want any spelling mistake, and we have magic string, so always be careful. The some settings here, we will pass that to our view. Let me open the index view, and we need to display that right here. We will have to define the model here. That will be some settings. Perfect. Where we have the welcome message here, let me display model.text. Perfect. And right here, let me add a style tag. There I will have a body and give the background color to whatever we have defined in the some settings here. And let me run the application. Let me remove the paragraph tag, we do not need that. And perfect, our application is up here. We have the red color and the text. If I go back, that is exactly what I have here. Let me make a change, save that, and if I refresh here, perfect. We have hello from the coding station, and that looks good. Now with that, our basic settings are coming up from appsettings.json file. Let me show you what benefit we have with the app configuration from the next video. We want to work on the app configuration. Let me open portal.azure.com, and if you do not have that in the Azure service, you can search for app configuration here. Open that, and let me create one. Resource group. You can assign anything that you want here. Resource name has to be unique. Let me call that .NET Mastery App Config. That looks good. Pricing tier, we will go with the free one. That is sufficient. But if you want to go with the pricing details, you can compare on what exactly is different. And if your business requires standard, you can go with that. But whatever we will be learning here, free will be sufficient. Let me select that, and then we will go to the networking tab. We do not want to add tags or anything. Let me create our free Azure App Configuration. It will take about 30 seconds or so, but let's wait till the deployment is complete. Perfect, the deployment is complete. You can go to the resource, or if you go to the home page, in the app configuration, we have that right here. Let me open that, and perfect. We have the basic overview tab, but you can see a new endpoint has been created for our app configuration. Now there are two main features here that we will see. First is the Configuration Explorer, and next is the Feature Manager. Now the main operation here that we want to look initially is the Configuration Explorer. That will be the place where you will be adding all of your secret keys and value. You can easily create that with a key value. If I go back to the code here, what if we want to create something like a section? In demo, we have the refresh value. That is simple. Let me copy the demo, paste that, and next, whatever the value is, we will separate that by using double colons here. That way it will replicate the same structure in app settings. The value, we have that as 0 here. Let me append that. And if you want to apply any label like tags, you can do that. But I want to keep everything super simple. That is one way of creating all the key values for your app configuration. Another way, you can directly import that. Right here you can select a service. If it is in other app service that is hosted on portal, you can do that. Or if it is inside any configuration file. For .NET we have the JSON file. Let me select that here. We will navigate to the folder that we have, and there let me select the app settings.json. The default separator here is a double colon, and that looks good. With that, if you hit the apply button, it will automatically import all the values, and you can see 7 key value pairs were imported. If I go to Configuration Explorer, great. It basically retrieved everything that we had in the app settings, but we do not want everything here. Only thing that we want to work on is the demo. Let me delete everything else here, and perfect. Now by default the value is hidden here, but if you click on values, perfect, everything is visible. Let me edit that from red to, let's say, green right here. We have hello from .NET Mastery. Let me edit that to hello world here. Perfect, save that. Now we have different values for the same API keys as we compare that to our project file. Now what I want to do is when we are retrieving or assigning the config values here, I want the Azure App Configuration, not the local app settings.json file. We have configured our app config in Azure. Let me go back to the application, and in order to connect there, we need to add a NuGet package. Let me open that, and I will search for Microsoft.Azure.AppConfiguration.ASP.NET Core. I have the include pre-release enabled here. Let me install the latest version, accept that, and perfect, that looks good. If I go back to the app settings.json, we need to define a connection string to our Azure App config. Let me go back here, and that will be inside access keys. We have connection string. Let me copy that and let me paste that right here. Perfect. Looks good. With that, we have the connection. Now we need to configure program.cs to use that Azure App configuration. For that, on the builder here, we will say builder.services.add Azure App configuration. That is enabled because we added the NuGet package. There we have to define the connection string. We can get that from builder.configuration.getConnectionString, and we need the name. Now the reason I'm using getConnectionString here is you can see it gets a section with the name of connection strings. If you have any other name right here, things will not work. In that section, we will retrieve the key Azure App config. Let me paste that here. And that way it will retrieve the connection and configure Azure App configuration. We have an error here. It will be builder.configuration and not builder.services. Perfect. That looks good. With that, let me run the application and see what happens. To your surprise, it will automatically change the background color to be green, and there we go. So you can see it is no longer using the app settings that we have right here. It is actually using the configuration that we have in the app configuration, because right here we have green color and text is hello world, and that is exactly what we have. Now if I change this here, let's say to be hello world from .NET Mastery, apply the change here. If you go back and refresh here, nothing happens. But if you restart the application again, let me do that, you will notice the change will be reflected, and now we will see the updated welcome text. That looks good. If the application is running and we update something in the app settings or the configuration in app configuration, it is not automatically reflected until we restart the application. But if we want to implement something, that could easily be done, but there are few things that you have to consider. When we implement something like auto reload of the properties, we need to have a trigger in the existing keys that we have. We can say something like, let's say when the refresh value is updated to anything, then we want to reload all the configuration. So basically, if I update refresh value from 0 to 1, 100 or any other number, then all the other key values will be reloaded dynamically. For that, we need to modify the app configuration that we have by default. Let me cut the connection string, and we need to define or configure few options. We need to add the connection string that is inside option.connect, and we will pass our connection string. Perfect. That looks good. After that, we have to add something called as configure refresh here, and there, let me build an object here for refresh, and there we will have options to configure on when we will refresh. On refresh here, we need to register an endpoint, and there we can define that if that endpoint or that value is updated, then refresh all the settings in our configuration. We need that endpoint here. If I go back, let me copy demo, refresh value. Great. So now whenever the demo refresh value is updated, we are telling it to refresh all the configuration. But that is not everything. On top of that, we will have to add builder.services.add Azure App configuration in our services, and then we will have to invoke app. There is a method use Azure App configuration. This will automatically enable our application to use the app configuration middleware to update the configuration automatically when we update that in portal.azure. And with that configuration, let me run the application. And perfect, we have the green color. Let me open the portal.azure. There, let me update that from green to some other color. Save that. And now if I refresh here, you will notice it does not get updated automatically. And the reason behind that is even if we updated that, our trigger is set to be demo.refresh here. Let me modify that to some other value. And as soon as you update that, if I refresh here, there we go. With that, it dynamically reloaded all the settings and modified the color as per our expectation. One thing that is needed in any app settings is if I go back to the application, right now we have app settings. Let's say the values here will be different for different environment, like development database connection will be different than production or staging. How can we accomplish the same thing using app configuration? For that we have labels here. If I do an edit here, we can do add value, and there we have to add a label. So let's say if the environment is development here, we will have a background color of green. Add that here, and let me add a different value. If that is production, let me make that blue here, and great. That way we have different value for different environment. But now if I go back to the application, and in the program.cs here, we can basically define what labels we want. First we will say .select, and we will say key filter .any, comma, then we have label filter. We want label filter .null. That will basically load the label filter where we have no label, and that looks good. Now after we load that, we want to override that by anything that is development, but rather than using development, we want to use builder.environment.environment name. That way if it is development, it will load the value for development. If it is production, it will load production. But with that, if you run the application, you will see something different. By default, it will load the orange one, and if we go back, that is the one with no label. Why did it not load the green color? The reason behind that is the environment name is case sensitive. If I go to the launch settings.json, you can see it is a capital D here. Let me go back, I closed that accidentally. And in the configuration here, let me delete this development. We cannot edit the label. Let me create add value for that one. Development will be green color. Label, we have to be explicit. Development. And perfect. With that, let me restart the application. And now we will see the green color. And perfect, that is exactly what we want. So with that, you can see now we have labels where based on the environment name here, it will automatically load that value. Let me delete the production here. And perfect. That looks good. Before I end the video, there is something here with the name of Snapshot, and it is in preview right now. If I go back to the application, and if I examine the NuGet package that we installed, you remember the package was preview. If you did not have the version 7.0.0 preview, then Snapshot will not be available in the code. It might be released soon, but if it is still in preview when you are taking the video, then make sure that the NuGet package that you install is the preview version, and that will work. But now what exactly is a snapshot? As the name implies, snapshot is basically taking a snapshot of all the configuration that we have, and that cannot be updated. Now, of course, you can delete the snapshot and create a new snapshot. All of that you can do, but you cannot update anything in a snapshot. Let me show that with an example where we have the welcome text. Let me add a value here for development. And right here, let me display welcome to .NET Mastery and dev. Perfect. Looks good. Now with that, you can see we have multiple labels for development when it comes to background color. Let me display the value. We have green for development and welcome to .NET Mastery Dev for development. Let me go back here and run the application. And with that, we will see the updated welcome text. Perfect. That looks good. Now let me take a snapshot and use that. We will go to snapshot here and we will create a snapshot. Let me call that .NET Mastery-dev here. The composition type, let me keep that as key here. But then what are all the keys that we want in a snapshot? We will say we want all the key that starts with the word demo. You can have equals to, any or all. Starts with is good enough. And then we can select a label. Let me select the label of development here and create that. That will create a snapshot with label of development. And perfect, the snapshot is created here. If I click on that snapshot, well, we can examine that here. And great. It will display all the values that are there in the snapshot. And you can notice all the values that are present have the label of development. Now with that, let me go to the configuration, and where we have the background color, let me give that, let's say pink color here. And where we have the development here, let me edit that. And let me just display development, hello world. Great. Now if I go back and run the application, you will see pink color. And the text will also be updated. Perfect. But now if we want to use snapshot here, on the option here we have select snapshot and then we have to give name of that snapshot. If I go back here, let me copy that. Perfect. So what will happen here is it will first select everything and whatever is later, that will override. Now if I restart the application, we will still see the old settings here because that is what is stored in our snapshot. If I view here, value, we have the green color and welcome to .NET Mastery-dev. That is exactly what is being displayed. If I go back here, let me cut that. And if I add that before the option .connect, you can see that is getting overwritten by the new settings that are updated right here. Main reason behind snapshot is where you have configuration. There might be some configuration that will not be updated. For that, you can create an immutable object and use that to load the settings. We have seen the configuration explorer, but now we want to see what the feature manager is. And for that, let me go back to the application and I will do some basic setup here. Let me open the controllers. Let me create a new controller here with the name of block controller. It will be an empty controller. Looks good. Let me create one more controller here. I will call that post controller. For the block controller, we will work on that. Let me add the view, index view. It will be an empty view. And there I will have an h1, welcome to new block feature. And we have two features. Let me go back to shared underscore layout. And where we have the li, let me copy that, paste it one more time. For the block controller, we have the index. And let me display blocks there. For now, let me delete the post controller. We will add that later. But perfect. Let me run the application and see what happens. If I go to blocks here, great. We have the new page here and that looks good. Right now the block feature is a new feature to our existing application, and let's say it is not available to any clients. Right now it is in development, but when we publish, we do not want to publish right away. We want to deploy the application without the blocks here, but after a few hours or few days, we want to toggle a switch or a flag, and that will automatically display the new feature to our client. What if we want something like that? Right now you might think that I will not need that, but I am portraying a very simple example, but there are many more use cases which we will uncover as we progress further. For that simple functionality, we have something called as Feature Manager in the app configuration. There we will create a new feature. We have to give that feature flag some name. Let me call that block feature, and then we have label. Do not enter anything for the label right now. Keep that as empty, and we have something called as feature filters. We will come back to that later on. With this basic configuration, let me hit the apply button. Now right now you can see it is not enabled, and you can toggle it to enable or disable that feature. But what I want to do is based on the configuration here, I want to hide or display the page right here. In order to accomplish that, we will have to install another NuGet package. Let me go back, manage NuGet packages, and we have something called as Microsoft.featuremanagement.ASP.NET Core. We will include the pre-release, and let me install the latest version. Perfect, that looks good. With that installed, we will have to configure our application. So inside program.cs here, we need to add a feature flag where we have the add Azure App configuration. So on the option here, we can say use feature flags. And perfect. With that, we also have to add services here. On builder.services, we have the add feature management. We will have to add the using statement. Let me do that here. Perfect. Looks good. We have the app.use Azure app configuration that will also be required, but since we already added that, we should be good with our feature flags. Now the main question. If I go to block controller, how can I toggle this based on the value of our feature flag? For that right here we have something called as feature gate, and there we have to write name of our feature flag, that is block feature. This is a magic string here, so make sure not to make any spelling mistake, and that's all that we have to do. With that, if I run the application, you will see that in action. If I go to blocks here, perfect, you can see the page not found. If you go back, and if you toggle that to be enabled, you will have to wait for 30 seconds because that is the default cache time. If you try before that, it will not be updated. So let me wait for 30 seconds here. And after that, if I go back here, you will have to refresh the application. And then if you hit blocks, great. You can see it is enabled based on the feature flag. And that is exactly what we want. Right now the feature flag that we have in our application, they are cached for 30 seconds. But if you want to toggle that in the program.cs here, we can configure options on the use feature flag, and we will set option dot the cache expiration interval to, let's say, 5 seconds. With that, let me restart the application, and now we will not have to wait for 30 seconds. It is enabled. Let me disable that. That is working. Let me wait for 5 seconds here. We will do a refresh, and if I click blocks, perfect. Let me enable that. Go back here. Wait for 5 seconds. and we will refresh the application. If I click blog, great. That way you can see how easy it is to toggle new features. We have the feature flag in action. Right now it is at the controller level. If you want, you can implement that at the action level as well. So whatever you want, you can do that here. On top of that, one thing that I would do is rather than having magic string here, if I go back to the application, I would rather have a constant. So right here, let me add a class, stop the application. Let me call that feature flags here, and I will have a public constant string. Copy that, and I will use that here, feature flags dot blog feature. Let's say you have another action here. Let me call that index new. We do not have a view for that, that's okay. In the action also, you can have await, and you can use feature manager. You have to inject that in the controller here. Let me do that. And after you inject the feature manager, you can directly check underscore feature manager dot is enabled async, and there you have to pass the feature flag. So feature flags dot blog feature. If it is enabled, you can do something else, you can do something else. Now sometimes you can even redirect to different view based on if a feature is enabled or not. I will not go into all of those details here, but you can accomplish all of that. Let me add task of action result. Perfect. In order to see that in action, where we have the blocks here, let me call that temp blocks. It will go to index, well, I think that is index new. And perfect. Let me try that. Let me add a debugging point. When we click here, initially you can see it goes in the if condition. Looks good. We don't have the view, that's okay. Let me go back and let me go to feature manager. Disable that. Wait for 5 seconds. We will have to refresh again. If I click the temp blocks, this time you can see it goes to not found because we have the feature gate. Let me comment that. We will have to restart the application. I forgot that. If I click on temp block, it will go to the else condition. Looks good. Let me go back and let me enable that again. We will wait for 5 seconds and then we will refresh here. If I click on temp blocks here, it will go in the if condition and perfect. That way you can see it is dynamically being toggled and that looks good. Now it was only to show you guys. Let me remove that here and I will keep it here so that you can have one more way, but we will be working on index. Now let me go back to the portal here and create a new feature flag. I will call that block feature 3, or let me call that block feature 2. That will be the name. We can enable that. Do not apply any label or anything. Perfect. Right now it is enabled. If we go back to the application, we need to create another constant for that. Block feature 2. Great. Now if I go to index here, you can see I have feature 1, feature 2. Let's say we implement another feature here, feature 3, and we want to only toggle that if this particular block feature 2 is enabled. Well, let me do that for feature 2. That makes more sense naming wise. For that we have a tag helper for feature manager, but we will have to add that in the view imports here. We will say add tag helper. We will add Microsoft.featuremanagement.ASP.NET Core. Once you add that, right here you will notice we get a new tag with the name of feature. We can give it a name here is equal to @ we can say feature flags Dot, we have our constant, that is block feature 2. If that is enabled, only then this feature 2 will be displayed, else it will not. Let me run the application again. If I go to blocks, it is displayed. Let me hide that. Wait for 5 seconds. And then if I refresh here, click on blocks again, that is gone. You can see within the view itself, we can have dynamic display using the feature tag, and that is great. Another thing that we can do is where we have the feature, we can add multiple features. Like let's say we want feature flag dot feature block dot block feature and block feature 2. In that case, we will have to add a requirement here where we can say any. That means if any one of them is enabled, this will be displayed. We also have something called as all. That means that both of the feature will be enabled, only then the content here will be displayed. Let me restart the application and see that in action. If I go back here, you can see block feature 2 is not enabled. So right now, because we have all here, right here, if we click on blocks, feature 2 is not displayed. We need to turn both of them on, and after that wait for 5 seconds. If I refresh here, great, feature 2 is enabled. So that way you can get creative with multiple feature flags, but there is something else that you should be careful about. Before that, let me go to our layout here, and where we have the blog, we can add the feature flag here. We can say feature name is equal to feature flags dot where we have the blog feature. If that is enabled, only then we want to display in the UI. Let me refresh here. That looks good. Let me go back and disable that. Wait for 5 seconds here. And then if I refresh, well, I think I will have to restart because I do not have hard reload enabled. Let me try that here. It is disabled. Let me enable that. Wait for 5 seconds here. And if I refresh here, great, the blocks come back again, and that is all dynamic. Now there is something that you should be careful about with feature flags. Feature flag is something where your team needs to work together. Because if you add feature flags for every small things that are not required, you are basically adding lots of code that will always stay in the application. You also have to be vigilant about setting a time like every 6 months. All the old feature flags that have already gone live, that should be deleted from the application. Now deleting them is super simple. If you go to the main class here and remove the constant, it will display all the error message where it is being used, and all you have to do is remove them. But that is something that you should always set in stone, that every 6 months, check for the old feature flags that are no longer required. You should always remove them to keep your code optimized and clean. And if you implement that, feature flag will be a blessing for your application. Now for the next setting or the next advantage that feature flag brings, we need to add identity in our project. Let me right click here, add new scaffolded item, identity. Let me add that here. Let me override all the files. We will have to create a new DB context here. Let me call that Azure App Configuration DB context. Actually, let me rename that to be application DB context here and add that. And perfect, that is done here. Let me close that. If I go to program.cs, you will notice it adds the default identity, and we need connection string for our SQL server. Let me scroll up here. It did not add the connection string. Let me retrieve that. Copy the name, paste that here. and we need to go to app settings. Perfect. We have the application DB context connection. Name looks good. And the server is also valid for my machine. Let me copy that. Paste it here in the get connection. And I believe that looks good. Perfect. Let me break that out here. And great. So everything is looking good. Now we need to add a migration. Right here, let me open that. I will say add migration, add identity. That will basically add the migration for identity tables. Perfect, looks good. Let me do update database here. That will create the database. And let me open SQL Server. And perfect. Now before I open SQL Server, we have a login partial. That view we need to add it right here. Let me call partial. Name is equal to underscore login partial. If I take a look at that view, it basically has login and register, and we want that. Let me run the application here, and now we will have the identity integrated. Great. You can see we have login and register button. But if you click there, you can see nothing happens. Because right now you can see we have MVC, but the identity is a Razor project. We need to add some more configuration here. And let me close everything else. And in our program.cs, at the very end where we have map controller, we will also add map Razor pages because identity is a Razor class library that got scaffolded in the areas right here. And perfect. With that, if I run the application, now it will be able to redirect to the pages. If I click register, great, we have register and login, and all of this is done automatically by the .NET identity. Let me create an account here, hello@dotnetmastery.com. Password, I will say admin123 *. If it is not strong enough, we will have validation. With that, it will automatically do the registration. We can click here to confirm the account, but perfect. If you log in here, that works, you can see here, and you can log out. Now the main purpose was not to show you how to scaffold identity in a project that you should already know, but let me create more accounts. I created 2 accounts here. One account is brugin@gmail.com and the other one, let me go back, is hello@dotnetmastery.com. If I go to my database here in the tables, ASP.NET users, perfect. We have both the accounts here and that looks good. In the last video, we added identity to our project. But what was the reason? Let me show that. In the block feature here, let me edit that. And when we were creating, you saw there was something called as feature filters, which we did not toggle. Now this is a very important feature that I use in my production application. And let me show you the reason behind that. Where we have the feature filter, we can create more filters. And what I mean by that is sometimes what will happen is if a user is logging in, after logging in you can check the email of that user. If that email is, let's say, your internal company user, you want to release some features right away so they can test for a few days, and after everything looks good, you can roll that out to your other clients. In the target filter here, you can set the default percentage to be 0. That means that none of the user will be able to see this feature. But on top of that, we can override that by user. You can set a specific user in your directory, or you can override that by group, where you can say @ .NETmastery.com. Let's say that is my internal company users. For them, the percent will be 100%. They will be able to see the feature, but not anyone else. With that, let me add that here and apply the change. Now that is not the only thing that we have to do. We need to add more configuration in our project. Let me go back to my project here, and I noticed we have authorization, but we do not have app.useAuthentication. We need to add that here. Perfect, looks good. Now what is the configuration? Rather than typing all of that, let me search for target filtering ASP.NET Core. We have the link here, and you can see in feature management, we have enabled a feature for specific user and group. There we need to add target filtering. For target filtering, we need to add a class here. Let me copy the same name. You can always customize that based on your requirement. Let me stop the application. Add that here. And let me go back. Copy that. Paste it right here. Perfect. Let me do control dot here. Implement interface. Did we miss something there? With the new implementation, they have cancellation token here. Let me add that. And perfect. Here, basically what it is doing is in the identity that is signed in here, it is checking all the settings, and if that is valid, then it will continue. Now going into the details here is beyond the scope of this video. This is the default implementation that they have, so you can use that, and you can always add a debugging point and go through the details to see all the settings. But with that, let me go to the next step here. We need to enable the target filtering on feature management. Let me go back here where we have the feature management, add target filtering. That looks good. And then we need to inject that targeting context accessor. Do that here. It will be on builder.services. Perfect. That looks good. Now let me go to our controller, block controller, the index here. Let me make that an authorized endpoint, and let me see if that works. Let me try to log in here as Brugin@gmail. If I go to blogs here, I do not see feature 2. If I log out, log in as .NET Mastery, that is the internal one, and I do not see that. Let me take a look at the setting here. Let me edit that here. That looks good. Let me go back and let me open the blog index. Well, of course, we forgot to remove this one. Let me remove that. Save that and let me restart. It has the correct feature now. Let me log in again here. Go to blogs, and it is not visible. Where we have the group here, I have the @ sign. That should not be possible because we are splitting that by @ here in the default logic. Let me remove that. If it contains .NETmastery.com, then it is internal. With that, I do not believe I need to restart the application. Let me refresh here, and great. Feature 2 is visible for .NET Mastery, and if we try Brugin@gmail, it will not be visible. Great. So that way what will happen is when you roll out a new feature, you can initially set both of them right here to be 0% or maybe not add any override groups. Once you deploy, you can add internal account, and then if you test everything looks good, you can remove this override by group and set the default percent to be 100. That way now everyone will be able to see the new feature. If you go back to the code here, well, right here if you refresh, great. Even Brugin@gmail is now able to see feature 2 And that looks good. With that, you can see the true power of feature flags when you are deploying. You can set or limit the number of users that will see the new feature and roll out once the internal testing looks good. And that is the true power of feature flags.